I thank Margaret Barker for her challenging and stimulating presentation. My comments will be divided in two sections, the question of authenticity and the question of methodology. So the question of authenticity. The Jordanian-led artifacts first surfaced around 2010 in Israel. They're controversial because they're non-provenance, that is, they did not originate in an academically controlled excavation. This justifiably raises the suspicion of forgery, and this understandable suspicion unfortunately generated various false claims in the press, spread by even many scholars, for example, that the Jordanian-led artifacts had no precedent. As a slide 1 here, you'll see an example of a precedent, which is a lead magical book dated to the 4th to 5th centuries of the Common Era in the National Roman Museum here in Italy. The text seems basically nonsensical. But you see in the next slide that the Gnostic-led books, mostly nonsensical text, contains, however, some brief, sensible encryptions. Again, like the Jordanian-led books. You see here that in the Gnostic-led book, beneath a serpentine image of Abraxas, right, more commonly known in the corrupted spelling Abraxas, we see his title, Iota Alpha Omega, a Greek version of the Tetragrammaton placed horizontally, long ago it's identified in the literature, with an overlapping vertical abbreviation of the name Abraxas, namely Alpha Sigma Chi, which I identified. All right, so in the next slide, we see that the Jordanian metal artifacts were often ridiculed as obvious fakes. For example, scholars of influence at SBL and other learned societies mocked this slide's crocodile on a Jordanian copper tablet as obviously produced by a modern plastic child's toy. Looking through my library, it took me less than 5 minutes to discover that this crocodile image, regardless of when it may have been created on the copper tablet, had been produced by an object that closely resembles an ancient type of Roman bronze crocodile brooch. Anyone can scratch or engrave writing into the surface of ancient corroded lead. This would remove the corrosion of the affected areas, which would then be covered up by artificial patina to conceal the hoax of the added text. The artificial nature of the patina and the recent date of the incisions would be immediately revealed by any professional scientific lab analysis. Adding raised content, which is what we have on the Jordanian lead books, to ancient corroded lead is an entirely different affair. Any attempt to add raised text or images to ancient lead would result in the immediate loss of the surface patina and corrosion, and the images would transfer only very unclearly and would look blurry on the surface of the now relatively clean metal. This is because the oxides of the corrosion would prevent a clear transfer of the imagery. There are thus two insuperable challenges to adding modern raised images to ancient corroded lead. First is how to retain the corrosion and patina in the image transfer attempt. Second is how to make the transferred images look as crisp and clear as the images on the Jordanian lead books. There is no known method to achieve either of these objectives, not in the textbooks and not in the knowledge of metalworkers. Close to a dozen lab tests have determined that at least some of the lead books metal lacked alpha particle emissions at 5.3 megaelectron volts, a state that requires the passage of at least 200 years after the production of lead, which would coincide with the time the texts and images were created. As for methodology, although I date the Jordanian lead artifacts to the immediate post-Second Temple period and beyond, possibly even to the High Middle Ages, I find Margaret Barker's interpretation of a First Temple setting congruent, at least with the possibility that some Second Temple traditions may hark back to First Temple times. As an Islamic tradition says, the diversity of opinions of scholars is a blessing or a mercy. Margaret Barker has mentioned my discovery of triangular encryptions in the Jordanian artifacts. I should explain this as follows. André Lemaire of the Sorbonne University in Paris and I both independently identify the Jordanian lead books as being based on the coinage of the First Jewish War and the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 135 of the Common Era, whose inscriptions were in Paleo-Hebrew, like those of the Jordanian lead books. The lead books echo coinage slogans like "for the redemption" or "for the freedom of Israel," the name Shimon, that is Bar Kokhba, etc. Also included are slogans from Hasmonean coinage. Imagery from Greco-Roman coinage also appears throughout the lead books, such as that of a female nymph, which was widely and in a sensationalistic way misidentified in the popular press as the face of Jesus. The inclusion of coin imagery is congruent with the Jordanian artifacts functioning as Jewish amulets, perhaps as burial objects for soldiers who fell in the Bar Kokhba revolt, like the more well-known Orphic gold tablets. My findings in general were accepted, of course not in every detail, but in general, accepted by Philip R. Davies, Bernhard Long, Charles Heberl, John Sawyer, Robert Gordon, and Alan Millard. David Hendon, now we go to the next slide. David Hendon argued independently of me that Bar Kokhba coins abbreviate the name Shimon in order to create a link with the Shema Yisrael's first word Shema, here, from Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And that some of the bizarre spellings on Bar Kokhba coins are not sloppy accidents, but intentional esoteric configurations. The Bar Kokhba coins contain triangular arrangements of text, as in Figure 4's abbreviation of the name Shimon, there at the top of the slide, simultaneously intentionally evoking because coinciding with the word Shema here. Figure 4's bottom two images show two examples of bizarre spelling on Bar Kokhba coinage congruent with what we find throughout the Jordanian metal artifacts. Hendon overlooked that strange arrangements of letters on Bar Kokhba coins could bring to mind traditions that link the origins of Jewish letter mysticism involving letter permutations to Rabbi Akiva and Shimon Bar Yochai. The Bar Kokhba coins and the Jordanian lead artifacts may conceivably offer evidence for a kernel of historical truth behind these traditional Jewish claims. All right, on to the next slide. Now, in this figure 5, in slide 5, we get to the Jordanian lead artifacts. Here we see 3 consecutive triangle patterns identified with red highlighting that form the word Shimon, Israel, and redemption, that is Geulat, spelled defectively lacking aleph, echoing the Bar Kokhba coin slogan for the redemption of Israel, Geulat Yisrael. Another defective spelling of redemption is in the red box, while the blue box contains a full spelling of Geulat, and both of these are in reverse reading direction. The 2 artifacts Margaret Barker discussed are from designs discovered in the 2 Jordanian cities, Karak and Shobak. This is noteworthy. The 2 cities are linked historically. The Shobak Crusader castle, built by Baldwin I of Jerusalem in 1115, was the site of royal power until 1142, when the leadership relocated to Karak's strategically superior castle. From Karak, one enjoys a view of the Dead Sea. In the next slide, we see the Jordanian lead book's B image, which is inspired by the famous Ephesus B coinage, which contains a relatively straightforward text, this B image. At the top of the design are 2 words that flank a B along the wings. Each of these 2 words read from the bottom up. On the right, in the yellow oval, are the letters Shin, Beit, Tav, Nun, a defective spelling of Shabbaton from the Torah phrase Shabbat Shabbaton, or Sabbath of Sabbaths. And on the left, in the red oval, is Mem, Beit, Vav, Aleph, Maboa, entrance or onset, producing the text, the entrance of the Sabbath, right, or the beginning of the Sabbath. At the bottom is my people. In the Torah, the phrase Shabbat Shabbaton is found only in Exodus and Leviticus, the only 2 books of the Torah in which God addresses Israel as my people. In the next slide, the next slide shows the Jordanian menorah lead artifact, here shown in a gold exemplar, echoes a coin text from the first Jewish revolt, specifically the phrase Year 3, or Year Gimel, over a chalice, and holy from the phrase Jerusalem the Holy. Surely, these 2 Jordanian tablets straightforward texts conceal more meanings of an encrypted sort of the general type Margaret discussed. In my published study on these artifacts, I tried to identify only those encryptions that I found congruent with the controls offered by the Bar Kokhba and other coinages in order to avoid possible random patterns. It would be helpful if more scholars engaged with these difficult texts to advance our state of knowledge. Unfortunately, scholars are reluctant to do this for understandable reasons, above all, their non-provenance status. Now, in the next slide, Figure 7's chalice with the letters Shin Gimel, Year 3, standing for Year 3 above it, is paralleled in the Jordanian artifact in this slide, where, however, the Shin alone is retained in order to form a triangle of the letters Shin Mem Ayin, an abbreviation of Shimon. That again evokes the Shema Yisrael. However, directly in the middle of the text beneath are the final 2 letters of the name Shimon, Wa Nun, flanking the straight descending yellow line. In my study, I presented evidence that the Jordanian artifacts reinterpret the coinages Shin Gimel, Year 3, in the more profound sense Shimon Geulat, Shimon redemption. This instance, Shimon Bar Kokhba as a messianic redemptive figure. The chalice in figure 8, like the one on the Bar Kokhba coin, is that of the measure of the Omer, which harks back to the First Temple era. In conclusion, perhaps after a generation has passed, more scholars will take a second look at the case of the Jordanian lead artifacts in a more dispassionate light. Non-provenance items initially dismissed as obvious forgeries sometimes turn out to be authentic. This may prove to be the case with these enigmatic metal artifacts from Jordan. In the end, they may turn out to supply a missing link in the history of Jewish mysticism, some of whose ultimate roots in much earlier forms may reach back to the First Temple era. I commend Margaret Barker for her tireless efforts to promote interest in and to cultivate scholarship on the Jordanian metal artifacts, and I thank her again for her engaging presentation. There's 6 of them. The first one is does the menorah represent the tree of life in the Holy of Holies? Number 2, unless it was
Well,
missed
let's
by
deal
the
with that
audience.
one first, Samuel, because you've obviously got access to a screen. The short answer to that is yes. But then the big question is that in the biblical sources, in the Hebrew Bible, the menorah is outside the Holy of Holies, but in Christian sources, like the Book of Revelation, the
Right.
menorah is within the Holy of Holies, and that's the big
right.
problem.
Right. If memory serves, isn't that also the case in Second Baruch?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Right. What's the second question?
Unless it was missed by the audience, how were the lines from one symbol to another identified, prioritized? Not too clear to me, but so how were the lines from one symbol to another identified, prioritized? I think you spent the whole lecture explaining that, didn't you?
The answer is that it was done by trial and error, and it's really to describe that as a method is really an exaggeration. The whole thing has been trying out to see what worked.
Sure.
And the control on this was always, is there an exact mirror image with the letters read round in the same sequence in the same direction? And I filtered out all the other exciting possibilities simply by applying that strict limitation. And hundreds of things have emerged. So what's the next one, Samuel?
Number 3, have you considered that in addition to meaning honeybee, Deborah may be derived from Deborah, the oracle, the Holy of Holies?
I have I have a long paper on this, but I did say at the beginning that I have simplified the things dramatically because you can't cover 10 years research in 45 minutes.
Right.
But certainly De Vere and the traditional understanding that this was the place of oracles, the way that the Greek and Latin translations of that reflect this, yes, that's an important part of it. Yeah.
Right. And they ended that with just a little observation. She is the woman, final hey, right, the feminine indicator in Hebrew, who receives the word, Deborah, in her day. Not quite sure what they mean, but yeah. All right, number 4, are these the only pages which refer to Mother in Heaven? Do the other pages refer to Father in Heaven, or do they also refer to Mother?
Well, the short answer to that is I can't answer that question because these are the 2 of the only 3 pages I have studied in any detail. The third page has no mention at all of the female figure. Well, not that I've found at the moment, but these 2 are the ones that I've spent most time on. But of course, when you're working in the dark, I mean, there is no precedent for this work, as you know, Samuel. You can go for a fortnight and get nothing, or you can have 3 finds in one day. Completely unpredictable. I had no idea what was going to emerge from these things. So it may be that by lucky chance I have found the only 2 tablets that mention the female figure. On the other hand, there may be a lot more in other tablets still waiting to be worked on.
Well, I'll throw in there, I believe I found several references to Lady Zion, right? Which
yes,
right,
yes,
which was right. So that's also, you know, a variant or version of the Mother in Heaven.
Oh, it's the same thing. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Jerusalem, Zion, etc. Right. So 5. When can we expect a book on her lead pages studies?
Well, the answer is I'm still putting together into some sort of sequence and order a vast amount of diagrams and trails I've been following for the last, well, I suppose 8 years, really seriously. And I've got 6 sections in order, and I don't know how many more sections there will be. But if we say it's a work in progress, that's all I can say.
All right. So the final question, is it possible that a core group of concepts determined the placement of the letters and the rest were not necessarily considered when designing the plates? If so, which ones might be the core?
But that's an interesting question. I find that all the letters are used with equal frequency. I think they're all important. Um, so I don't think that some of the letters are just in there as fillers, and they all seem to be functioning, especially when, and this is something I didn't touch on today, the 2 aspects that are very important. One is the gematria and the numerical values of the letters, and those give all sorts of interesting words. And clearly, if you're doing that, then you've got to have a value for each of the letters. And the other is that there is some very interesting Pythagorean style geometry in the books. But again, I didn't touch on that today because you can't do everything in 45 minutes.
Sure.
And there, clearly there is a function, important role for each of the letters on the tablets. But more than that, I can't say.
Yeah. Well, all I could add, I believe, would be that if we look at the different designs, each design each text would have to be examined, individually.
Oh,
And
yes.
so,
Yes.
for instance, the 5 lines text, as I call it,
Yes.
on the famous little tablet with the
Yeah.
photo with the coin on the side. It does seem, right after spending untold hours on that, as I'm sure you
Yes.
have,
I have indeed.
every letter seems to be able to fit into some pattern that is
Yes.
coherent,
Yes. Yes.
without exception. So
I think it will take somebody with infinite patience and time, many years, to decode that one.
yes.
We just need a whole army of scholars with 24 hours a day free. Where are we going to find that?
Right. Well, as I've written in one of my comments, I think it will probably take a generation for the main body of scholarship to be able to look at these artifacts more objectively, because of
Yes.
all of all of the sensationalism and then all of the factual errors that were spread by even learned societies like SBL, right? So it's
Yes.
almost contaminated and doomed to field
Well,
until
this is the
maybe
problem. And I don't think there is any other scholarly endeavor that has had to start so far behind the starting line due to the mess created by other so-called scholars. We're still fighting hard to get back to, to a place where we can start, because all this negative stuff is online. And it's a ridiculous situation.
No, and I mean, there are some, really eminent scholars, powerful scholars, who have gone on record. They have, for instance, I'm thinking of Charles Hebbrell, who read through my book and gave it a really, ringing endorsement.
Yeah.
He's the current president of the International Linguistic Society, right? But even people of his stature, this is. It's as if it's like Orwell's 1984.
It is. It's a surreal world, quite extraordinary. And the fact that it takes 10 years to make the first little bit of progress. We're in a world where people want everything now and in a soundbite.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the patience that's required to work on these things could be, well, something that simply isn't going to happen. We must carry on and hope that there will be other people who will join the noble band, and we can get some more light from the lead books.
Yeah, well, I think we do have hope. There are other cases of artifacts that have been discovered and were dismissed as obvious forgeries, and 10, 20 years later,
Yeah,
lo
that's
and
right.
behold, they turn out to be
Anyhow,
authentic.
yes, they turn out to be the most exciting thing.
Mhm.
Yes, it can be disheartening, but on the other hand, when you make the discoveries, they are so fascinating. They
Mhm.
make all the toil and all the negativity and all the attacks, which really are unnecessary and quite distressing in a way. Um,
Yes.
they make it all worthwhile. You can kind of keep going.